They say the earth remembers. Long after the last whip cracked, long after the fields lay empty and the houses rotted into the ground, the soil itself remembers. In Georgia's red clay, where rain cuts deep veins through the hills, there are whispers, low and trembling, that a woman's cry still lingers there, faint as ash in the wind. She was called Hannah, though even that name is carried softly, passed mouth to mouth in the dark, as if the night might punish anyone who dares say it too loud. Hannah's story is not written on any page. It survives only in shadows, told in circles around dying fires, in the trembling voices of elders who have seen too much sorrow to ever believe silence will save them. They speak of her not as a person, but as something larger, an ache, a scar pressed into the land itself. To speak of Hannah is to summon grief too heavy for the living, grief that bends the spine and clouds the eyes until you see her shape in the smoke. On the plantation, silence was its own master. It ruled the cabins at night, where mothers swallowed sobs into blankets so their children would not hear. It ruled the fields, where bent bodies moved like shadows across rows of cane, voices smothered under the overseer's watchful eyes. Silence lived in the doctor's house, too, the house where Hannah's fate was sealed. Silence was the rope, the chain, the shackle that could never be seen, yet it bound tighter than iron. And Hannah bore it all. The whispers say she was young, though hardship made her seem older. They say her eyes were dark wells, deep enough to drown sorrow, but hollowed of laughter long before her time. Her body was bound not only in chains, but in a silence that cut deeper than any lash. To endure was the only lesson she had been allowed to learn. And endure she did, until the silence itself began to crack, until her story rose against the dark. Now, when the fire burns low and the night grows too still, the elders lean closer. They lower their voices to a tremble and whisper, "Do you hear her still?" Some say the wind is her cry. Some say the rustle of cane is her footsteps. And some swear, when the ashes of the fire scatter into the night, it is Hannah herself breathing through the smoke, asking to be remembered. The earth remembers, and it will not let her rest. Hannah had learned early that suffering was not an accident. It was the language of the land. On the plantation, pain was not a punishment for wrongdoing. It was ritual, repeated daily until it became air, until it became prayer. The lash carved across her back in long strokes that told stories no one dared to speak. They were not marks to be healed, but signatures, ownership written in blood and scar tissue. Each scar was a sentence, each weld a command. They told her who she belonged to, and in those days, to belong was to vanish. She remembered the sound more than the pain. The sound of leather cutting air before it kissed her flesh. The sound of her own breath, trapped in her chest, refusing to escape. The sound of men laughing, satisfied with their work, while she folded inward, making herself small so the earth might swallow her whole. The fields stretched endlessly around her, golden in the sun, yet they might as well have been walls of stone. She was not free to leave, not free to speak, not free even to cry. When her body broke beneath the weight of labor, it was not mercy that came, it was the doctor. A man whose shoes never touched mud, whose clothes smelled faintly of tobacco and iron. His eyes were like polished glass, empty, reflecting nothing but power. He did not see a woman. He saw a specimen. He touched her flesh as one touches wood or bone, with curiosity but without reverence. The tools he carried gleamed like teeth in the lantern light. He liked to keep her still, liked to press her down as though the table itself could swallow her will. Each visit left her hollowed further. His hands were cold, his voice sharper than the instruments he wielded. He spoke of her body the way men speak of broken tools, something to be handled, repaired, used again until it gave out completely. She was not asked if she hurt. She was not asked if she feared. Her silence was his permission, and silence was all she had. But silence is not nothing. Silence holds memory. It stores every wound, every insult, every stolen piece of a soul. It was there in the way she stiffened when his shadow darkened the door. It was there in the way she lay awake long after the others slept, her body aching with bruises she could not name. Endurance became her shield, but endurance was also a curse, for it meant she carried everything. And the more she carried, the heavier the silence grew, until it pressed against her ribs like a storm waiting to break. And storms always break. Night on the plantation was never truly dark. Smoke from the hearths drifted through the cabins, the smell of ash clinging to every breath. Shadows stretched long across the dirt floors, and silence wrapped itself thick around the enslaved like a second set of chains. Hannah would sit by the last glow of the fire, her body heavy with pain, her eyes fixed on embers that refused to die. It was there, in that fragile space between exhaustion and despair, that a sliver of mercy sometimes found her. Mary would come quietly, her footsteps soft as the wind. She was older, her hair silvered in strands, though she could not have been more than 30. Years of work had aged her faster, carving deep lines across her face, but her hands still knew tenderness. She would kneel beside Hannah, dip a cloth into a small bowl of water she had hidden away, and press it gently against the lashes on Hannah's back. The touch was not painless. It stung, but it carried something Hannah had almost forgotten existed: care. Mary hummed while she worked. Old songs, torn fragments of melodies carried from across the ocean, half-remembered but still alive. The tunes curled low in her throat, steady and soft, meant to soothe without drawing the overseer's notice. To the men who owned them, the sound of a woman's song was nothing. To Hannah, it was everything. It was a reminder that the body might be scarred, but the soul could still reach for light. Sometimes, Mary would whisper stories too, legends of rivers that could carry souls home, of ancestors who walked invisibly beside them, of women who had endured worse and yet became something more. Hannah listened with her eyes closed, her breathing slowing as if the words themselves wove a blanket around her. For a few heartbeats, she allowed herself to believe the night was safe, that the world beyond the walls might be kind. But mercy here was a hunted thing. It had no place in daylight. Kindness was fragile, always at risk of discovery. Once, when Mary's song drifted too loud, the lash found her too. She returned with her back torn open, her voice hoarse, yet still she came to Hannah's side. Still she sang. Hannah realized then that kindness was not weakness. It was defiance. And yet, even as warmth flickered between them, Hannah knew it could never last. Every candle must gutter, every ember turn to ash. As she leaned against Mary's trembling hand, she felt it deep in her bones. The dark was waiting, patient and vast, ready to devour what little light dared to shine. The air grew heavier as Hannah's belly began to swell. Life should have meant hope, but on the plantation it meant fear. A child born in chains was not a blessing. It was profit. And for Hannah, it was a sentence written before the child even drew breath. Every step she took in the fields felt slower, the soil pulling at her feet as though the earth itself knew what loomed ahead. The doctor visited more often now. His shadow stretched long across the cabin walls, his hands cold as bone when they touched her. He never smiled, never softened. His voice was clipped, clinical, each word striking her like the ring of metal against stone. To him, her swelling body was not a cradle, but a curiosity. He watched her with the sharp eyes of a predator, measuring, calculating, as though she were no more than an experiment carved from flesh. Whispers rose among the slaves, carried in fragments when the overseer's back was turned. Some said the doctor had claimed the child as his own before it even came. Others said he had darker desires, that his visits to Hannah were not about care, but conquest, not about healing, but taking. Their voices dropped to murmurs, fearful that even the night itself might betray them. Everyone knew the price of pity. Even Mary began to keep her distance. She still looked at Hannah with sorrow, but her eyes stayed low, her song silenced. The overseer's gaze lingered too long on anyone who lingered near Hannah, and fear is a powerful leash. Hannah felt the loss like a wound. The little flame of kindness she had clung to flickered out, leaving her alone in the dark once more. The world around her mirrored her dread. The skies seemed darker, storms brooding on the horizon. Wind rattled the shutters of the cabins at night, as though unseen hands clawed for entry. In the fields, shadows stretched longer than they should, reaching for her as if the land itself wanted to drag her under. Every whisper, every glance carried weight, as though everyone could see the doom gathering around her. Still, silence ruled. The overseer said nothing. The master said nothing. The doctor spoke only to himself, muttering in his journals, scribbling words Hannah would never see. And she carried the silence inside her, every beat of her heart echoing like a countdown, every breath heavy with the sense that her story was being carved toward an ending she could neither stop nor escape. The storm was coming, and Hannah could feel it in her bones. The night came like a tolling bell. It was late summer, and the air pressed down heavy, swollen with the weight of storm clouds that refused to break. Hannah felt the first pain deep in her belly, sharp and twisting like a blade turning in her flesh. She doubled over in the dirt, clutching her swollen body, and the women around her knew. Their eyes widened, their hands froze in their work, but none dared to speak. The overseer's gaze was near, and even the miracle of birth was not their own to claim. She was dragged from the cabin, half carried, half pulled, her cries muffled against the night. No midwife's hands, no circle of women humming to steady her. Instead, she was delivered into the doctor's cold house, into that room where walls smelled of iron and decay, where every surface gleamed under lantern light with instruments laid bare like weapons. He did not greet her. He did not soothe her. He ordered her to the table, his words clipped, impatient, as though her body's agony was an inconvenience to his work. Sweat beaded across her brow. Her cries thickened in her throat, but his hands moved with a cruel precision, arranging his tools while she writhed. Her body was no longer her own. Each contraction tore through her like fire, yet she was pinned not only by pain, but by the weight of his presence. The women who should have been at her side were absent, their roles stripped from them. Instead, the doctor claimed her, as he always had, her body his specimen, her suffering his stage. When her child crowned, when agony should have turned to blessing, he did what no story should ever need to tell. His hands, gloved and cold, lingered too long, violated the sacred act of birth. His cruelty cut deeper than any scalpel he carried. What should have been deliverance became desecration. The child's cry pierced the air, thin, weak, desperate, and still he worked as if nothing had been stolen, as if nothing had been broken. The wooden walls swallowed her scream. No one came. No one ever came. Her agony echoed only in her own chest, a soundless howl that clawed its way upward until it split into silence. Something inside her cracked that night. Not just flesh, not just bone. Something older, something vast. In that moment, Hannah ceased to be only woman. She became wound. She became storm. She became the silence breaking. The lantern flickered, its flame shivering against the walls, throwing long shadows across the doctor's instruments. The room smelled of iron and sweat, of blood too fresh to forget. Hannah lay still upon the table, her breath shallow, her body trembling in waves that seemed to come from a place beyond pain. The newborn's cry was faint, a fragile thread of life hanging in the heavy air. The doctor moved with the arrogance of a man who believed himself untouchable. He did not look at her face. He did not hear her silence. He busied himself with his instruments, wiping one clean, setting another aside, humming faintly under his breath as though she were no more than a task to be completed. He had taken everything from her, her dignity, her body, her birthright of motherhood, and yet he moved without fear, without shame. But silence does not vanish. Silence gathers, and in that gathering, something ancient stirred. Hannah's hand, bloodied, trembling, slick with sweat, slid across the wooden table until her fingers touched steel. The scalpel was small, almost delicate, its edge gleaming in the lantern light like a sliver of the moon. She closed her hand around it. It felt alive in her grip, as if it had been waiting for her all along. Her breath slowed. The world shrank to the rhythm of her pulse and the hiss of the flame. She watched him turn, his back half-turned, his eyes focused on his tools, smug in his certainty that she was too broken to rise. He never saw her coming. With one motion, swift, unhesitating, she carved her story into him. The scalpel's edge split flesh, opening him like the wounds he had carved into countless others. His screams split the night, high and desperate, echoing against the wooden beams. He clawed at the wound, stumbled, begged, but no soul came running. The overseer did not stir. The master did not wake. The slaves, hearing his cries, stayed silent in their cabins, their faces buried in their hands. For once, the night carried justice, and no one moved to stop it. Blood pooled on the wooden floor, dark and spreading, a shadow within shadows. Hannah did not weep. She did not shout. She only stared, her eyes hollow, her face pale and still as ash. The doctor's voice cracked in his silence, his body collapsing into his own red ruin. The scalpel slipped from her hand and clattered softly against the wood. The sound was small, but it was enough. Enough to mark the end of one story and the beginning of another. The kind that lingers, the kind that haunts, the kind no fire can burn away. The doctor's chamber lay in ruins of soundless horror. The lantern, still burning, swayed faintly, its light catching the red smear across the table, the floor his still form. The newborn's cry, a thin, trembling thread, was the only voice in that hollow room. Hannah stood barefoot upon the blood-soaked boards. Her body quaked, her gown torn, her skin pale as bone. Yet her eyes were steady, emptied of fear, emptied of tears. She looked down upon what she had done, not with triumph, not with relief, but with the stillness of someone who had crossed into a place beyond return. Outside, the night pressed heavy. Crickets had gone quiet. The air itself seemed to listen. Somewhere in the cabins, men and women sat upright, their ears straining, their hearts beating hard. They had heard his scream. They knew what it meant. But no one moved. No one came. They let the silence do the speaking. Hannah gathered her child, wrapping the frail body in cloth torn from her own dress. The baby stirred weakly, mewling, its skin flushed with new life. She pressed the child close, her blood streaking its blanket, as if baptizing it in the truth of the night. Her hands shook, but she held firm, whispering words no one else would ever hear. When she stepped out into the night, the world did not rise against her. The dogs did not bark. The overseer did not come running. Only the wind moved, curling through the trees, carrying the scent of iron and smoke. The stars seemed to flicker, pale witnesses to what had been done. By dawn, whispers already began. A healer murdered in his own chamber. A slave woman gone into the woods, carrying her newborn in arms. Some said she walked barefoot into the swamp, never to be seen again. Others swore they heard her lullaby echoing through the cane fields, soft and terrible, a song carried by the wind. A few believed she rose not into the swamp, but into legend, that the earth itself had taken her, cradling her pain, burying her story beneath moss and root so it would never be forgotten. The master's men searched. They dragged the riverbanks, combed through the cypress groves, sent hounds snarling into the shadows. Yet they found nothing. No trace of Hannah, no trace of her child. Only silence, stretching across the plantation like a veil. And so, in that silence, the story began to breathe. They say the earth never gave her back. The swamp swallowed her footsteps, the woods hushed her cries, and the rivers carried her name like a secret. Yet in the nights that followed, when the wind pressed against the walls of the cabins, the slaves whispered of her, not as a woman, not as flesh, but as something else, something larger, heavier, unbound. Children learned to hush when the cicadas went silent, for that was when Hannah's lullaby drifted from the fields. Low, sorrowful, threaded with a note of rage. Mothers told them, do not answer. Do not sing back. Her song is not for you. Her song is for the guilty. The doctor's chamber remained untouched. The master locked its door, but the stains spread through the floorboards, dark as tar. No scrubbing could cleanse it. Workers refused to enter. Lanterns blew out on their own. At night, some claimed to hear the scrape of steel against wood, as if a scalpel were still in motion, carving unseen lines into the dark. Over the years, her story stretched beyond the plantation. Travelers spoke of a pale figure moving through the cane fields at dusk, a woman carrying a child whose face was always hidden. Her dress hung in tatters. Her hands were red, though she touched nothing. They said her eyes followed you, empty but knowing, until you could not sleep without seeing them again. Some swore she cursed the land. Crops withered, births came still, and fevers swept through the quarters. Others believed she spared the innocent, touching them with the gentlest hand, as if remembering what little kindness had ever been shown to her. But to men of power, to men who carried tools of cruelty, she was death itself. Time moved on. Names faded. Masters died. Fields changed hands. Yet even a century later, when storms lashed the cypress groves and lightning split the sky, the people of that region still lowered their voices. They said, "Do not walk alone at night. Do not linger by the doctor's house. And if you hear a lullaby, pray it is not meant for you." And so Hannah's story did not end. It could not. It lived in whispers, in shadows, in the trembling silence before dawn. Not a tale of victory, nor of mercy, but of blood, silence, and a song carried by the wind. A legend born from cruelty, a curse carved by a scalpel. And when the night grows too quiet, they still say her name. Hannah, you're here right now because of you. Every click, every watch, it all starts with you. So don't just watch, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because this journey is yours.